Baizhui never wrote about the Pipa line at all. Looking at the dense tentacles sticking out around the Pipa, all the audience dared not move at all. At the end of the performance, the terrifying woman heard a voice. Baizhui, do you still remember the peach blossom land that Tao Yuanming told you about? In the 10 years of Yuanhe, I offended some big people. They said that I, the power of the Eastern Palace, dared to do the things of the sword official, so I was demoted to Xunyang City with a finger on Zhaoling, and I was the Sima of Jiangzhou. On the day I left the Emperor's book, the sword official behind me looked at me coldly. Baizhui, the Imperial Court is no longer the Imperial Court, and I set off immediately. When I finally looked back at the Imperial capital, I seemed to see that the whites of the sword official's eyes had been quietly covered with black, and one eye seemed to open in his hand. A month later, I came to Xunyang City, which is full of autumn, and came out to greet me for the first time, but my expression looked very strange. Because for a moment he told me that everything was fine here. It was the people of this city who were a little strange. I was a little puzzled and asked, what can the people be strange about? I can only tell my husband that Xunyang City is no longer Xunyang City. Huge doubts instantly occupied me. Why would 40 Hejian Guan say the same thing in different places? The urban area here is indeed not as lively as the capital city, and there is a trace of death. I looked up and saw that all the vendors were sitting quietly in their stalls, neither shouting nor working, and everyone had their eyes closed. A strange feeling crept up in my heart, as if I was the only one alive in the whole mess. When I arrived, the horse ran to me and asked, "Are you Lord Baizhui Bai?" I nodded, and I wanted to buy a horse for my career. I looked at the horses, just horses of different colors looking at me. They were skinny and ready to go, as if they hadn't eaten for a long time. After much hesitation, I chose a slightly healthy black horse. At this time, a strong man walked in outside the door, carrying a few sacks, and the sacks came with a pungent fishy smell and dripping blood. I frowned and asked, "What are these things?" Xiaoxi answered my words while carrying the sack, replying to Lord Bai's words, "These are horse feed." Horse feed? Before I could react, Xiaoxi poured the food in the sack into the grass. All the horses are like beasts at the mountain gate, grazing the flesh and blood in the grass. What kind of meat are you feeding these horses? I trembled all over and pointed at Little Thorn and congratulated loudly. Little Thorn scratched his head in confusion and replied, "What are you talking about, Lord Bai? There is no meat here." At a glance, I was stunned that there was no flesh and blood in the grass, just a pile of weeds. It seems that I was really hit too hard, and I was already hallucinating. After I muttered to myself, I thought of the good teacher of 5 Yuan, the Prime Minister, who was just walking on the only way to go to the dynasty as usual, and the assassin dared to show up blatantly. What's even more bizarre is that the court actually acted as if this had never happened. The civil and military ministers of the Manchu dynasty were extremely indifferent to my memorial, as if they had violated some taboo. What is there that cannot be touched in the palace? After a day of shopping in the city, the sun was setting, and I looked at the setting sun slowly leaving, and suddenly found a trace of weirdness. The sun seemed to be wriggling, and it seemed that a row of teeth had grown on the sun in the far sky, and I was chewing something constantly. I must have been dazzled again. Sima's official position in Jiangzhou was, as I expected, very leisurely, and nothing happened. One day I rode a horse to Tao Yuanming's former residence, and after walking not far, I found that the grass there was actually black. Then I came to the bottom of a hill. Looking at the desolate and messy scene in front of me, I was very shocked. Is this still the peach blossom land under the beautiful verse? I found a local old man to ask. The old man turned his head tremblingly, and what came into his eyes was a face with dull eyes, bloodless and extremely pale. The old man suddenly said, "Yes, it is in this place." He pointed to an inconspicuous weed, and there was a tombstone in it. "Didn't you live in the mountains and rivers for the rest of your life? Why is the scene here in Taoyuan like this?" Huge doubts took over me for a moment, and suddenly there was a heavy fog around me. While wondering, I kept groping for the exit, and suddenly came to a peach blossom forest. I then walked to the peach forest near the end of a mountain, The mountain has a hole. Through the hole, I finally saw the light. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were thousands of miles of traffic and everyone's face was filled with a happy smile. When they saw me, they warmly invited me to eat together, and they exchanged cups and cups. Everyone was filled with happy smiles. The villager sitting opposite me suddenly asked with a smile, "Do you remember what I told you?" I was very confused. What did I tell you? Isn't it my first time here? Although I couldn't see his face clearly, I could clearly feel that his smile stopped. He put down his chopsticks and slowly opened his mouth. "I told you that I am not a foreigner, but have you forgotten what you did?" The air was terrifying. He raised his voice and shouted, "Fisherman, have you forgotten? Kisho. .7s." Most of my wine woke up in an instant, and I hurriedly lowered my head to look at myself, wearing a simple coon coat, a pair of fast-moving rotten straw sandals. This is not me. A cold air rushed towards the spirit of heaven. I quickly stood up and looked around. There is nothing fertile here. The sticky and slippery land hangs high under my feet. The sun in the sky has long since disappeared, replaced by an incomparably gloomy sky, and the delicacies on the plate have turned into rotten and smelly food. What have you done? The villagers with twisted expressions kept questioning me. I covered my head in pain and squatted down, shouting in my mouth, "I am not a fisherman, I am not a fisherman." When I opened my eyes again, I was back at the entrance of the cave where I came from, and there was a man standing in front of me. He was wearing a simple shrunken shirt and a pair of tattered straw sandals facing away from me. The man was muttering to himself, "I shouldn't go anywhere. I thought it was just a paradise." Although they told me not to leak it, I still told the prefect, and the descendants said that the prefect came back without finding it. His emotions suddenly became excited, and he shouted uncontrollably, "False, false. The prefect has found it. The prefect has found the Peach Blossom Land, and he was discovered by them. The prefect has come back, but the one who came back is not the prefect at all. He is a monster." At this moment, I finally saw his whole picture. One after another, tentacles and back stretched out, and there were people's eyes on it. He suddenly roared at me, "Bai Juyi, leave Cruise City. Cruise City is no longer Cruise City. Please leave by boat immediately, but don't listen to that woman's lute."